I'd just like to say, Harun, that in the recent AV events, the Alternative View conferences, we have had a couple of speakers speaking on this very particular issue. One is a guy called Dr. David Halpin, who's a retired orthopedic surgeon, and he has made, I think, close on a dozen trips into Gaza and the West Bank. Initially, he funded these relief trips out of his own money. In the first trip cost him over £100,000. Now he has a charity called the Dove and the Dolphin, and people who are interested in David Halpin's work can go to the Dove and the Dolphin. He gave two presentations at AV1 and at AV2, and then at AV3 we had Cynthia McKinney, who was the Green Party presidential candidate in the last US elections, and she has made a number of trips with aid convoys into Palestine, and of course in the first one, both she and David Halpin were on the yacht that was rammed by the Israeli Navy. And in fact, Cynthia credits David Halpin with actually saving her life because, he kept her calm in what was obviously a very, very traumatic situation. And David Halpin is absolutely convinced that the intent of the Israeli Navy was to sink the vessel. And they were in international waters, and they were in the deepest part of the Mediterranean. So there is precedent for what's actually occurred in the last few days. And even then, the condemnation of Israel's actions in ramming that yacht were significant from around the world, but extremely quiet from really the UK and from the US. And we see the same thing again now. The reality is this arrogance of the Israeli government to these kind of actions is so enormous that they actually believe that they can do this and get away with it because they know they're not going to get the wrath of either the British government or the US government. And let's remember that I think it was it Netanyahu? I'm just trying to back in 1992 when he was questioned in the Israeli parliament about some of Israel's actions and whether or not they might upset the American government. And his response was, let's not worry too much about the American government because you know and I know that Israel controls the American government. Now, that may or may not be true, but it's just indicative of the arrogance of the Zionist Israeli leadership.
Absolutely. Now, for our listeners, we actually talk about so much. We talk about oneness on this show, about our connections, and and basically, rather than let's focus on what's not going right, because there's so much not going right. Like, for example, perhaps you can mention in a moment about the Mexican oil disaster. How does a one-world government affect the day-to-day reality of the average human being, average Joe public, being whether they're in India, whether they're in the UK? How does it affect them on a day-to-day basis, especially if they have absolutely no interest in international politics?
Well, again, it depends on really how they're operating within their community, because there are some parts of the world. I was recently in Mozambique in Africa, and down there on the southeastern coast of sub-Saharan Africa, it's not obvious that the one world globalization objective has any day-to-day impact at all. It's a local economy. People they don't have very much, they don't want very much, and people live very much within the local community. Having said that, there are efforts to sort of bring in consumer goods, which of course then requires that the people start to earn more money. So, there will be an impact there. And by the way, let me just make the observation here that the globalists know exactly what they're doing, because Zbigniew Brzezinski, who is and has been Obama's mentor for 27 years. Zbigniew Brzezinski was originally a lecturer, a professor at Columbia University. Back in 1969, he wrote a book called Between Two Ages, the technotronic era. And he was in his early 40s at the time when he wrote this book. And he wrote then that the challenge for Western government in the coming decade will be to keep humanity locked into consumerist materialism, thereby preventing them from connecting themselves with their true self. Now, isn't that a very interesting observation? And
Absolutely.
this same man, recently, I mean, when I say recently, I mean literally just 2-3 weeks ago, at a presentation to the Council on Foreign Relations, made the observation, he said the greatest challenge to the objectives of the New World Order, i.e. the globalized one world government, is the rapid political awakening amongst the masses. Now, what he didn't mention as well was the rapid spiritual awakening, because they think they can control and influence the political awakening. But, of course, what they can't control and what they have no idea of how to control and stem is the phenomenal pace at which people are waking up on a spiritual basis. And to follow on your point of, is this all negative that we're talking about? No, it's not. Because just as in our personal lives, it is an unfortunate, perhaps, reality that we learn most from personal trauma. Whatever that personal trauma is, whether it's a breakup of a relationship, or a loss of a loved one, or somebody becoming seriously ill close to us, becoming seriously ill ourselves, loss of a job, loss of our financial security, whatever it may be, all of these events are actually tremendous opportunities for personal growth. We can either elect to wallow in self-pity and effectively play the role of the wounded child.
That's right.
Which of course we will do for a time anyway. But ultimately, the challenge is to step beyond the wounded child and take a look at what we can actually learn from that experience. And so just the same as on the microcosm, that we get that benefit from the personal trauma, what we are seeing now is the phenomenal awakening is ironically being accelerated by exactly the sort of events that we're talking about, because people who hadn't even considered that there was anything wrong previously are now taking a look at what's going on within the economy, with the global meltdown, with the Palestinian attacks, and even things like the recent volcanic eruption, and now, and we'll get onto it in a second, the terrible disaster that's occurring in the Gulf of Mexico. All of these events are actually triggering people, and people are going, hang on a second, what the hell's going on here? And they're actually starting to take a deeper look than they were previously, and this is all part of the awakening process. So although there is undoubtedly much trauma, let's acknowledge that this trauma is having an extremely beneficial impact on global consciousness.
Now, we've got loads of questions coming in from listeners, and I want to put them to you in a moment. But you mentioned about the Mexican oil disaster. Talk to us about that.
Of course, it's not Mexican. It's on the U.S. side of the Gulf.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is in the Gulf of Mexico, yes. What we have here in the Gulf of Mexico is...
I meant that, sorry.
Okay. The Gulf of Mexico is obviously quite an enclosed area of seawater. Obviously, it's a very deep part of the sea, because there are those who certainly believe that actually that's where the asteroid hit that caused the extinction of the dinosaurs many millions of years ago. So consequently, what you have there is very, very deep water, but it's also quite sheltered because it's protected by Cuba and the West Indies. So it doesn't have a massive tidal flow. Now, when the Exxon Valdez disaster occurred in Prince William Sound, which was some 20-odd years ago now, but Prince William Sound actually naturally had a massive tidal race. I mean, the difference in the height between low water and high water, just on a normal tide, was in excess of 30 feet. So what happened, and it was actually quite phenomenal, because even oceanographers weren't able to understand it. But although it was still a disaster, don't get me wrong, there's no question about that. And Exxon